If you subscribe now, it's because stories like this aren't meant to just pass by. They stay with us after the video ends. There's a photograph from 2012 that shouldn't exist. In it, a young woman with deep brown eyes and a body that measures 3 feet tall sits in a wheelchair, her hands resting on a belly that looks impossibly large against her frame. Her name is Deja. She's 24 years old, and she's 7 months pregnant. The photograph was taken in a small apartment in Cincinnati, Ohio, on a Tuesday afternoon when the light came in slanted and gold through cheap Venetian blinds. You can see the edge of a television in the background, a stack of medical bills on the coffee table. And if you look closely at Deja's face, you can see something that makes the image almost unbearable to hold in your mind. She looks terrified, and she looks determined. Deja was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, a genetic condition most people know by its cruelest nickname, brittle bone disease. But that name doesn't do justice to what it actually means to live inside a body where your skeleton is structurally unsound from birth, where a sneeze can crack a rib, where rolling over in bed wrong can fracture your femur, where your bones break not because you fell, but because gravity itself is too much weight for your frame to carry. By the time she was 24, Deja had experienced over 200 fractures. She had learned to sleep without moving, to laugh carefully, to never ever run. And then, in March of 2012, she discovered she was pregnant. The father was a quad, her boyfriend of 2 years. He was 26. He had the same condition. They had met at a support group for people with OI, in a church basement that smelled like burnt coffee and optimism. They understood each other in ways no one else could. The specific loneliness of being stared at in grocery stores, the exhaustion of explaining your body to strangers, the strange intimacy of knowing that the person you love could break just as easily as you could. When Deja told a quad about the pregnancy, he cried, not because he wasn't happy, but because he knew what it meant. The first doctor they saw was a high-risk obstetrician at University Hospital. Her name was Dr. Patricia Hoffman. She had gray hair pulled back tight and the kind of face that had delivered bad news so many times, it had learned not to soften the blow anymore. She sat across from Deja and Aquad in an exam room that was too cold and said, very clearly, "This pregnancy will most likely kill you." Deja remembers the exact tone, clinical, final, like she was reading a lab result. "Doctor," Hoffman explained that carrying a pregnancy to term would put catastrophic pressure on Deja's spine, her pelvis, her rib cage, that her lungs might collapse under the weight of the growing uterus, that her hip could shatter during labor, that even if she survived the birth, the baby would almost certainly inherit the condition, potentially in a more severe form than either parent. "And if the baby does survive," my Dr. Hoffman said, "you won't be able to care for it, not physically. You understand that, don't you?" Aquad reached for Deja's hand. His fingers were thin, careful. They had both broken their hands before. Deja asked, "What are the chances the baby doesn't have it?" Dr. Hoffman didn't hesitate. 0. Both of you carry the gene. The child will have osteogenesis imperfecta. The only question is how severe. There was a long silence. Then Deja said, "I'm keeping the baby." Dr. Hoffman's face didn't change. She pulled out a form and slid it across the desk. "Then you need to sign this. It's an acknowledgement that you've been informed of the risks and are proceeding against medical advice." Deja signed it. When they got home that night, Deja's father was waiting in the hallway outside their apartment. His name was Marcus. He was a bus driver, a man with broad shoulders and a voice that could carry across a crowded room. He had raised Deja mostly on his own after her mother left when Deja was 9. He looked at her and his face was something Deja had never seen before. Not anger. Worse than anger, disappointment. "You can't do this," he said. "Dad, no. Listen to me. You can't do this. You're gonna kill yourself. And you're gonna bring a child into this world who's gonna suffer just like you did. More than you did. And for what? Because you want to feel normal? Because you want to prove something?" Deja's voice was quiet. "Because I want to be a mother." Marcus shook his head. "You don't get to want that. Not like this." He left before she could respond. That night, Deja couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Akwad, listening to him breathe, feeling the baby move inside her for the first time. A flutter so faint she thought she might be imagining it. She had always known her body was broken. She had spent her entire life being told what she couldn't do. Couldn't play sports, couldn't dance, couldn't carry groceries, couldn't live alone without help. But she had never been told she couldn't love, and she had never been told she couldn't create life. The next morning, she posted the photograph on Facebook. She wrote, "This is me, this is my baby, and we're both going to be okay." Within 6 hours, the post had been shared 12,000 times, and the comments began. Most of them were supportive. Strangers sending prayers, heart emojis, messages of encouragement. But others were different. "This is selfish. How can you bring a child into the world knowing it will suffer? Who's going to take care of that baby when you can't even take care of yourself? This is what's wrong with society. People like this shouldn't be allowed to reproduce. Where's CPS? This is child abuse before the kid is even born." The comments kept coming, hundreds of them, then thousands. Deja stopped reading after the first day, but Akwad didn't. He read every single one. He stayed up late scrolling through threads on Reddit, on Twitter, on parenting forums where strangers debated whether people with severe disabilities had the right to have children. One night, he closed the laptop and said, "Maybe they're right." Deja looked at him. "Maybe we're being selfish," he said. "Maybe we're not thinking about what this kid's life is going to be like." Deja didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Do you wish you were never born?" Akwad blinked. "What? Do you wish you were never born because of your bones?" He shook his head slowly. "No." "Then why would our kid?" It wasn't an answer, but it was the only answer she had. As the pregnancy progressed, Deja's body began to betray her in ways she hadn't anticipated. At 5 months, she fractured 2 ribs while coughing. At 6 months, her pelvis began to shift under the weight of the baby, and the pain was so severe she couldn't get out of bed without Akwad lifting her. At 7 months, her lung capacity dropped so low that she needed supplemental oxygen at night. Dr. Hoffman scheduled weekly ultrasounds. Each time she measured the baby's bones. Each time, the measurements came back smaller and thinner than they should have been. "The baby has it," Dr. Hoffman said during one appointment. "We can see the bowing in the femurs, the fractures in the ribs. It's severe, Deja, more severe than yours." Deja stared at the screen, at the tiny, fragile outline of her daughter. She had already decided on a name, Atara. It meant crown in Hebrew. At 32 weeks, Deja woke up in the middle of the night with pain so sharp she thought her spine had snapped. Akwad called 911. The paramedics were careful, so careful, but when they lifted her onto the stretcher, she felt something crack in her lower back. She screamed. At the hospital, they discovered that the baby was in distress. Her heart rate was dropping. Deja's blood pressure was spiking. Her kidneys were starting to fail. Dr. Hoffman made the call. Emergency C-section. Deja remembers being wheeled into the operating room. The lights were too bright. Someone was putting a mask over her face. Akwad was beside her, holding her hand, saying something she couldn't hear. And then the anesthesia hit, and everything went white. What Deja didn't know, what no one told her until much later, was that during the surgery her heart stopped. For 3 minutes and 47 seconds, Deja was clinically dead. They revived her, shocked her heart back into rhythm, stitched her together, moved her to the ICU. When she woke up 3 days later, the first thing she saw was Akwad's face. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Deja's voice was a whisper. "The baby?" Akwad's eyes filled with tears, and in that half-second before he answered, Deja felt the entire world collapse into a single, unbearable question. Akwad leaned closer, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "She's alive." Deja closed her eyes. The relief hit her body like a wave, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of those 2 words. She's alive. But Akwad wasn't smiling. Where is she? Deja whispered. NICU. She's been there since the surgery. They won't let me bring her to you yet. Why not? Aquad looked down at his hands. She's really small, Deja. 1 pound, 11 ounces, and her bones. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. It took another 4 days before Deja was stable enough to be moved. They wheeled her down to the neonatal intensive care unit in a hospital bed because she still couldn't sit up without fracturing something. The pain in her back was constant, a low burning that spiked every time she shifted her weight. They had her on enough medication to dull it, but not enough to make it disappear. The doctor said that was intentional. They needed her alert. The NICU was on the 4th floor. It was a long white hallway with soft lighting and the constant hum of machines. Deja counted 22 incubators as they wheeled her past. Tiny bodies under blue lights. Parents sitting in chairs pulled up close, staring through plastic walls. When they stopped in front of incubator 17, Deja felt her breath catch. Atara was so small she didn't look real. She was lying on her back, arms and legs splayed out like a starfish, her skin almost translucent under the warming lights. There were tubes in her nose, in her mouth, taped to her chest. Wires ran from sensors stuck to her skin to monitors that beeped and flickered with numbers Deja didn't understand. But what broke Deja's heart wasn't the machines. It was the casts. Both of Atara's legs were in casts, tiny white plaster casts, each no bigger than Deja's thumb. Her left arm was splinted. There was a brace around her ribcage, so thin it looked like it had been made for a doll. A nurse standing nearby saw Deja's face and spoke gently. She fractured both femurs during delivery. 3 ribs. Her left humerus. We've stabilized her, but she's very fragile. We're doing everything we can. Deja reached out, her hand trembling, and pressed her palm flat against the plastic incubator. Can I touch her? The nurse hesitated. Not yet. Her bones are too unstable. Even the gentlest touch could cause another fracture. I'm sorry. Deja sat there for 2 hours, staring at her daughter through plastic, unable to hold her. Aquad stayed beside her the whole time. At one point he said, "She has your eyes." Deja didn't answer. She couldn't stop looking at the casts, at the wires, at the way Atara's chest rose and fell so fast, like she was working too hard just to breathe. That night, back in her hospital room, Deja asked the doctor when she could hold her baby. The doctor, a neonatologist named Dr. Raymond Chen, sat down on the edge of her bed and spoke in the kind of tone people use when they're trying to prepare you for something you don't want to hear. Deja, Atara's condition is extremely severe. She has type 3 osteogenesis imperfecta, which is one of the most aggressive forms. Her bone density is critically low. Right now, our primary goal is keeping her alive. Holding her. That's not something we can safely do yet. How long? I don't know. Weeks. Maybe months. It depends on how she responds to treatment. What treatment? We're giving her bisphosphonates, medication that can help strengthen her bones over time. But it's not a cure. And at her size, the dosage is extremely delicate. Too much could damage her kidneys. Too little won't help. Deja's voice was tight. What are her chances? Dr. Chen paused. Of surviving the first year? About 40%? The number hung in the air like smoke. And if she survives? Deja asked. She'll need surgeries, probably many of them. Rotting procedures to reinforce her long bones with metal rods. Spinal fusion if her spine starts to curve. She'll be in and out of hospitals for most of her childhood. And even with all of that, she'll be in pain. Constantly. Deja stared at the ceiling. But she'll be alive. Yes, Dr. Chen said. She'll be alive. Deja was discharged after 2 weeks. Aquad took her home in a medical transport van because she still couldn't sit in a regular car. When they pulled up to their apartment building, Deja looked up at the 3rd floor walk-up and realized for the first time that she couldn't get inside. There was no elevator. They had lived there for 3 years. It had never been a problem before. Aquad would carry her up the stairs when she couldn't manage it herself. But now, with her pelvis fractured and her spine barely holding together, even being lifted was too dangerous. Aquad made some calls. Within 2 days, they were moved into a ground floor unit in a different building across town. It was smaller, darker. The walls were thin enough that they could hear their neighbors arguing at night. But it had a ramp. Deja spent the first month going back and forth to the hospital every day. Aquad would drive her in their old Honda, modified with hand controls, and they would sit beside Atara's incubator for hours, watching her breathe, watching the monitors, waiting for something to change. Sometimes it did. Once, Atara's oxygen levels dropped so low that alarms started screaming and nurses came running. Deja watched them surround her daughter, adjusting tubes, checking vitals, speaking in rapid medical shorthand she couldn't follow. When it was over, one of the nurses looked at Deja and said, "She's okay, she's stable." But Deja could see it in her face. She's not okay. Another time, Atara fractured 2 more ribs. The nurses discovered it during a routine check. They hadn't moved her, they hadn't done anything. The bones just broke. Dr. Chen explained that it could happen, that her bones were so fragile even the act of breathing, her lungs expanding against her rib cage, could cause fractures. Deja asked, "Is she in pain?" "We're managing it as best we can." That wasn't an answer. But it was the only one she was going to get. The comments online hadn't stopped. In fact, they had gotten worse. Someone had found Deja's Facebook page and started a thread on a parenting forum titled, "Woman with brittle bone disease has baby. Should CPS intervene?" The thread had over 3,000 replies. Deja made the mistake of reading it one night while Aquad was asleep. "This is selfish and cruel. That baby is suffering because of her mother's ego. I feel bad for the kid. She's going to grow up watching her parents suffer and knowing she's the same. Honest question, why didn't she abort? This seems like exactly the kind of situation where abortion is the compassionate choice. People like this rely on taxpayers to fund their medical bills. I'm sorry, but if you can't afford to take care of a child, you shouldn't have one. What happens when the parents die young and this kid is left alone in the system? Who's going to adopt a child with this condition?" Deja closed the laptop. Her hands were shaking. Aquad woke up and saw her face. "You read the comments again?" "I shouldn't have." "No, you shouldn't have." He pulled her close, careful not to press too hard, and they sat there in the dark. After a long silence, Aquad said, "Do you ever think maybe they're right?" Deja pulled back. "What?" "Not about us being selfish, but about whether we can actually do this, whether we're enough. We have to be enough. But what if we're not?" Deja didn't have an answer. The next day, a social worker came to visit them at the hospital. Her name was Linda Cortez, and she had the kind of smile that was supposed to be reassuring but felt like a warning. She sat down across from Deja and Aquad in a small consultation room and opened a file. "I want to start by saying that no one is questioning your love for your daughter," Linda said. "But there are some concerns that need to be addressed." "What concerns?" Deja asked. "Atara is going to require around-the-clock care, specialized medical equipment, frequent hospital visits, physical therapy, occupational therapy. And given both of your physical limitations, the state needs to ensure that she'll be safe in your home." Aquad's voice was tight. "We can take care of her." "I'm sure you can, but you'll need help. We're going to require that you have a full-time caregiver in the home, at least for the first year. Someone who can assist with lifting, bathing, medical care, things that might be physically difficult for you to manage on your own." Deja felt something cold settle in her chest. "Are you saying we're not allowed to take care of our own daughter?" "I'm saying you'll need support. And if you refuse that support, we'll have to consider whether it's in Atara's best interest to remain in your care." The threat was unspoken, but it was there. Linda left them with a stack of paperwork and a deadline. They had 30 days to prove they could provide adequate care. That night, Deja's father called. She almost didn't answer. They hadn't spoken since the day he told her she was making a mistake. But she picked up. "I heard the baby's in the NICU," Marcus said. "Yeah. How is she?" "She's alive." There was a long pause. Then Marcus said, "I'm sorry." Deja closed her eyes. For what? For what I said. Before. I was scared. I'm still scared. But I shouldn't have. His voice broke. I shouldn't have made you feel like you were wrong for wanting to be a mother. Deja felt tears running down her face. I'm scared too, Dad. I know you are, baby. I know. They're saying we might not be able to keep her. Who's saying that? Social services. They think we can't take care of her. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you need? I don't know. Then let me help you figure it out. 2 weeks later, Marcus moved into their apartment. He slept on the couch. He learned how to operate Atara's medical equipment. He went to every appointment, took notes, asked questions the doctors didn't want to answer. He argued with the insurance company when they tried to deny coverage for Atara's medications. He filled out the paperwork for state assistance, for disability benefits, for every program that might help. And slowly, things began to stabilize. Atara gained weight, 3 ounces, then 5, then half a pound. Her oxygen levels improved. They weaned her off the ventilator. At 11 weeks old, the doctor said she was strong enough to be held. Deja will never forget that moment. The nurse lifted Atara out of the incubator, so carefully supporting her head, her back, her legs, and placed her in Deja's arms. Atara was warm. She smelled like hospital soap and something else, something sweet and new. Her eyes were open, dark and wide, staring up at Deja like she was trying to figure out who this person was. Deja looked down at her daughter and whispered, Hi, baby. I'm your mom. Atara blinked, and then she closed her tiny hand around Deja's finger. Deja started crying, not sad tears, not scared tears, relief. For the first time since the pregnancy, Deja felt like maybe, they were going to be okay. But that night after they went home, Deja couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the social worker's face, the stack of paperwork, the unspoken threat. She thought about the comments online, the strangers who said she was selfish, who said she didn't deserve to be a mother. And she thought about Atara, still in the NICU, still fighting just to breathe. Deja turned to Aquad in the dark and said, What if they take her away from us? Aquad didn't answer right away. Then he said, Then we fight. Atara came home after 11 months in the NICU. She weighed 9 pounds. She had fractured her bones 43 times, and she was alive. The day they brought Atara home, it snowed. Not a lot. Just enough to dust the sidewalks white and make everything look clean for a few hours before the cars came through and turned it gray. Deja sat in the passenger seat of the Honda while Aquad drove, going 15 miles under the speed limit, both hands tight on the wheel. In the back seat, Atara was strapped into a custom car seat that the hospital had provided, foam padded on all sides, designed specifically for infants with fragile bones. She was asleep, her face turned toward the window, her chest rising and falling in that quick bird-like rhythm that Deja had learned to recognize as normal for her. Marcus followed behind them in his truck, the back loaded with medical equipment, an oxygen concentrator, a pulse oximeter, a specialized bassinet with a pressure-relieving mattress, monitors that would track Atara's heart rate and breathing through the night, a cabinet full of medications with names Deja had memorized but still couldn't pronounce. When they pulled into the apartment complex, Deja looked up at their building and felt something she hadn't expected: fear. For 11 months, Atara had been surrounded by doctors and nurses and machines that would scream if something went wrong. There were people trained to save her life within seconds. Now it was just them. Aquad carried Atara inside in her car seat, moving so slowly it looked like he was holding a bomb. Deja wheeled herself in behind him. Marcus brought in the equipment, trip after trip, setting everything up in the small second bedroom they had converted into Atara's room. When everything was in place, they stood in the doorway and stared at it. The room looked like a hospital. Deja had tried to make it feel different. She had painted one wall pale yellow, put up a mobile with fabric stars, but the medical equipment dominated everything. The oxygen machine hummed in the corner. The monitors blinked with red and green lights. There were syringes and gauze pads and latex gloves stacked on a shelf. Aquad said, "It's not what I imagined." Me neither. Marcus put his hand on Deja's shoulder. She's home. That's what matters. That first night, none of them slept. Deja stayed beside Atara's bassinet, watching the monitors, listening to her breathe. Every sound made her jump. Every pause between breaths felt too long. Twice the pulse oximeter alarm went off because Atara's oxygen saturation dipped below 90%, and Deja had to adjust the nasal cannula and wait for the numbers to climb back up. At 3 in the morning, Atara woke up crying. Deja lifted her out of the bassinet, moving with the kind of precision the nurses had taught her. Support the head, support the back, never apply pressure to the rib cage, never twist the limbs. Atara was hungry. Deja tried to breastfeed, but it didn't work. It had never worked. Atara couldn't latch properly. Her jaw was too small, her sucking reflex too weak, so Deja fed her with a bottle, a special high-calorie formula that smelled vaguely like chalk. Atara drank 2 ounces and fell back asleep in Deja's arms. Deja sat there holding her, feeling the weight of her daughter against her chest, and thought, "This is what I wanted. This is what I fought for." But underneath that thought was another one, quieter and more persistent. What if I can't do this? The first month at home was the hardest thing Deja had ever done. Atara had to be fed every 3 hours around the clock. She had to be given medication 4 times a day, liquid bisphosphonates that she hated and would spit out if you didn't get the syringe positioned exactly right in the back of her throat. Her diapers had to be changed with extreme care because any rough movement could fracture her femur. And she cried. Constantly. Not the normal newborn crying that parents complain about. This was different. This was the sound of a baby in pain. The doctors said it was unavoidable. Her bones hurt. Her body hurt. They were doing everything they could to manage it, but there was only so much they could do. Deja learned to recognize the different cries. The hungry cry, the tired cry, the wet diaper cry, and the pain cry, a high, desperate wail that meant something was broken or breaking, and there was nothing Deja could do except hold her daughter and wait for it to stop. One night, 2 weeks after they brought Atara home, Deja was changing her diaper when she felt something shift under her fingers. Atara screamed. Deja's hands froze. "Oh God! Oh God! No!" Aquad came running. "What happened?" "I don't know. I barely touched her." They rushed Atara to the ER. X-rays confirmed it, fractured femur, right leg. The ER doctor, a young resident who looked like she hadn't slept in days, looked at Deja with an expression that made her stomach turn. Suspicion. "How did this happen?" the doctor asked. "I was changing her diaper," Deja said. "I was being careful. I swear I was being careful." The doctor didn't say anything. She just wrote something down on her chart. They cast at Atara's leg and sent them home with a follow-up appointment. But the next day, a social worker showed up at their apartment. Not Linda Cortez this time. Someone new. A man named David Brennan, with a badge clipped to his belt and a clipboard in his hand. "We received a report from the hospital," he said. "There are concerns about how Atara sustained her injury." Deja felt the blood drain from her face. "You think I hurt her?" "I'm not making accusations. I'm here to assess the situation." David walked through the apartment looking at everything. The medical equipment, the medication log, the notes Deja had been keeping about Atara's feeding schedule and diaper changes. He asked questions. How often did Atara fracture? Who was home when it happened? Were there ever any witnesses? He stayed for an hour. When he left, he said, "I'll be filing a report. Someone will be in touch." After he was gone, Deja sat on the couch and didn't move for 20 minutes. Aquad sat down beside her. "They think we're hurting her. I know. They're going to try to take her away." Deja didn't answer. She just stared at the wall. 3 days later, they received a letter from Child Protective Services. There was going to be an investigation. They would be required to attend a hearing. In the meantime, a caseworker would be conducting home visits twice a week. Deja called her father. "Dad, they're trying to take her." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We need a lawyer." They couldn't afford a lawyer. Marcus paid for one anyway. Her name was Angela Ruiz, a family law attorney who had worked on disability rights cases before. She was in her 50s, with short gray hair and a voice that sounded like she had spent years arguing in courtrooms. She met with them in their apartment and listened while Deja explained everything. The fractures, the hospital visits, the social worker's suspicions. When Deja was done, Angela said, "Here's what they're going to argue. They're going to say that Atara is being injured in your care, and that regardless of intent, you are unable to provide a safe environment for her. They're going to point to your own physical limitations as evidence that you can't adequately protect her." Deja felt sick. "But we didn't hurt her. She has a medical condition." "I know that, and we'll prove it. But you need to understand something. CPS doesn't have to prove abuse. They only have to prove that Atara is at risk. And given how often she's fracturing, they have a case." Aquad leaned forward. "So what do? We build a counter case. We get statements from her doctors confirming that these fractures are consistent with her condition. We document everything, every time she's handled, who was present, what the circumstances were. We show that you're doing everything right, and we pray that's enough." The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, the caseworker came twice a week, every week. Her name was Sharon Miller, and she was polite, professional, and absolutely terrifying. She would watch Deja feed Atara, watch her change Atara's diaper, watch her give Atara her medication. She would take notes. She never smiled. Once Sharon asked, "Do you ever feel overwhelmed?" Deja answered honestly, "Every day." Sharon wrote that down. Another time, Sharon asked Aquad, "If you had to do it over again, would you still have chosen to have this child?" Aquad stared at her. "What kind of question is that? Just answer the question." "Yes, of course, yes." Sharon wrote that down too. The night before the hearing, Deja couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything Angela had told her to say. "Be calm. Be clear. Don't get emotional. Show them that you're capable." At 2 in the morning, she got up and went to Atara's room. Atara was awake, staring up at the mobile above her crib. Her eyes followed the fabric stars as they turned slowly in the air. Deja reached down and picked her up, holding her against her chest. "I'm sorry," Deja whispered. "I'm so sorry this is happening." Atara made a small sound, not quite a coo, not quite a cry. Deja rocked her gently. "I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't know if I'm enough. But I love you. I need you to know that. No matter what happens, I love you." Atara's hand curled around a strand of Deja's hair, and Deja stood there in the dark, holding her daughter, and let herself cry. The hearing took place in a windowless conference room in a government building downtown. There was a long table. A judge, technically an administrative law judge, Angela explained, not a criminal court judge, a representative from CPS, Sharon Miller, David Brennan, Angela, Deja, and Aquad. Dr. Raymond Chen was there via video call, testifying as an expert witness. The CPS attorney, a thin man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses, presented their case first. He talked about the number of fractures Atara had sustained, 43 in her first 11 months of life. He presented photographs of her x-rays, showing bones that looked like they had been shattered and badly glued back together. He said, "While we acknowledge that Atara has a medical condition, the frequency and severity of these injuries raise serious concerns about whether her parents are capable of providing the level of care she requires." He called Sharon Miller to the stand. Sharon testified that while Deja and Aquad appeared to love their daughter, she had observed signs of stress and exhaustion. She noted that the apartment was cluttered with medical equipment, that both parents had difficulty moving around the space safely, and that there had been multiple instances where Atara had been injured during routine care. Then it was Angela's turn. She called Dr. Chen first. Dr. Chen explained very carefully what osteogenesis imperfecta was. He explained that Atara's fractures were not the result of mishandling, but of a genetic condition that made her bones extraordinarily fragile. He explained that even in a hospital setting, Under the supervision of trained medical staff, Atara had fractured multiple times. "Would you say that Atara's parents are providing inadequate care?" Angela asked. Dr. Chen shook his head. "No. In fact, I would say they're providing exceptional care under incredibly difficult circumstances. Atara is alive and thriving because of their dedication." The CPS attorney cross-examined him. "But would Atara benefit from being placed in a medical foster care setting, where she could receive professional supervision?" Dr. Chen paused. "Medical foster care is an option for some children, but Atara's condition requires not just medical knowledge, but emotional consistency. Children with OI need stability, need to be held and comforted despite the risks. That's something her parents provide that a rotating cast of caregivers cannot." Angela called Deja to the stand next. Deja wheeled herself up to the table. Her hands were shaking. Angela asked her to explain a typical day caring for Atara. Deja described it: the feeding schedule, the medication routine, the way she had learned to lift Atara without putting pressure on her bones, the way she watched for signs of pain, signs of fractures, signs that something was wrong. "Do you ever feel like you can't handle it?" Angela asked. Deja hesitated, then she said, "Yes, sometimes I feel like I'm failing, but I don't give up. I ask for help when I need it. My father lives with us. We have nurses who come twice a week. We're not doing this alone." The CPS attorney asked her, "Ms. Walker, do you believe your daughter's quality of life is compromised by her condition?" Deja looked at him. "I think her life is hard. I think she's in pain more than any child should be. But she's also loved, she's cared for, and she's alive. That matters. But if you had known, truly understood, how severe her condition would be, would you have made the same choice?" Angela stood up. "Objection, relevance." The judge looked at the CPS attorney. "Where are you going with this? Your Honor, I'm trying to establish whether the parents fully understood the consequences of their decision." The judge nodded. "I'll allow it." Deja took a breath. "Yes, I would have made the same choice, because she's my daughter, and her life has value. It doesn't matter how hard it is. She deserves to be here." The hearing lasted 4 hours. At the end, the judge said she would review the evidence and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Deja and Aquad went home and waited. 13 days later, the ruling came. Atara would remain in her parents' care, but with conditions. Mandatory home health visits 3 times a week, continued oversight from CPS for the next 6 months, and any future fractures would be immediately reported and investigated. Angela called it a victory. Deja called it conditional freedom. That night, she held Atara and thought about what the judge had said. This child is fragile, and so is this arrangement. Deja kissed the top of Atara's head and whispered, "I'm not going to let them take you. I promise." But even as she said it, she wondered if it was a promise she could keep, because the fractures didn't stop. Over the next year, Atara broke her collarbone, her wrist, her ankle, her ribs again. Each time, Deja had to file a report. Each time, a caseworker came to investigate. Each time, the question lingered unspoken in the air. How long until this becomes too much? And then, when Atara was 18 months old, something changed. She stopped fracturing. Not completely, but the frequency dropped. Weeks went by without a break. Then months. Dr. Chen said it was the bisphosphonates. They were working. Her bone density was improving. At 2 years old, Atara took her first steps. She fell. Of course she fell. But she didn't break. Deja watched her daughter stand back up, giggling, and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. But hope is a fragile thing. And what Deja didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the hardest part was still ahead. Because Atara was growing. And as she grew, she got heavier. And Deja and Aquad were not. Atara turned 13 in March of 2025. She was 4 feet, 7 inches tall. She weighed 92 pounds. Deja was 3 feet, 1 inch tall and weighed 68 pounds. Aquad was 3 feet, 4 inches and weighed 73 pounds. The math had stopped working. It happened gradually, the way most irreversible things do. For years, they had managed. When Atara was small, Deja could lift her. When she got heavier, Aquad could lift her. When neither of them could lift her safely anymore, Marcus was there. But Marcus was 64 now. His back wasn't what it used to be, and Atara was getting taller every month. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October. Deja got a call from Atara's school at 1:15 in the afternoon. The voice on the other end was the school nurse, and she was speaking too fast. "Mrs. Walker, Atara had a fall, she's okay, but what happened?" "She was coming down the stairs after lunch and she slipped. We need you to come get her. We think she might have fractured her arm." Deja's hands went numb. It had been 5 years since Atara's last fracture. 5 years of her bones getting stronger, of medications working, of doctors saying she was beating the odds. And now this. Aquad drove them to the school. They found Atara sitting in the nurse's office, her right arm cradled against her chest, her face streaked with tears. But when she saw her parents, she said, "I'm okay, I promise, it doesn't hurt that bad." Deja looked at the nurse. "What happened exactly?" The nurse hesitated. "There was another student, a younger girl. She was running down the stairs and lost her balance. Atara saw her falling and reached out to catch her. She stopped the girl from hitting the railing, but she twisted her arm in the process." Deja stared at her daughter. "You caught her?" Atara nodded. "She's okay. She didn't get hurt." Aquad's voice was quiet. "But you did." They took her to the hospital. X-rays confirmed a fracture in the radius, clean but painful. The doctor casted it and told them it should heal in 6 to 8 weeks. While they waited in the exam room for the discharge papers, Atara said, "Mom, I did the right thing, didn't I?" Deja looked at her daughter, at her dark eyes, Deja's eyes, and the determined set of her jaw. "Yeah, baby," Deja said. "You did the right thing." But later that night, when Atara was asleep and Deja and Aquad were sitting in the kitchen, Aquad said what they had both been thinking. "We can't lift her anymore." Deja didn't answer. "She's going to keep growing," Aquad said. "And we're not. We're already using the lift to get her in and out of bed. We can't carry her upstairs. If there's an emergency, if there's a fire or something, we can't get her out." Deja's voice was barely a whisper. "I know. We need more help. I know." Aquad reached across the table and took her hand. "That doesn't mean we're failing." But it felt like failing. 2 weeks later, they met with a social worker, not CPS this time, but someone from the state's Disability Services program. Her name was Rita Okafor, and she was kind in a way that felt genuine. She came to their apartment and sat with them and explained their options. "You qualify for a personal care assistant through the state program," Rita said. "Someone who can help with Atara's physical care, lifting, bathing, transportation, it would be covered." Deja's throat was tight. "So a stranger would be taking care of our daughter?" "Not a stranger for long," Rita said gently. "You'd interview candidates. You'd choose someone you trust, and you'd still be her parents. You'd still make all the decisions. This person would just be there to help with the things that are physically difficult." Aquad asked, "What if we say no?" Rita looked at him carefully. "Then we'd have to assess whether Atara's needs are being adequately met. And if they're not..." She didn't finish the sentence. The threat was quieter this time, but it was still there. They hired someone named Jordan. She was 28, a nursing student finishing her degree. She had worked with kids with disabilities before. She was strong. She could lift Atara easily. She was patient. She didn't ask invasive questions, and Atara liked her. That was what mattered most. At first, it was strange having someone else in their home. Jordan came 3 days a week, helping with things Deja and Aquad couldn't do anymore. Lifting Atara into the shower, carrying her upstairs when she wanted to visit Marcus, who had moved into a small house 2 blocks away. Taking her to physical therapy appointments when Deja's back was too bad to make the trip. Deja hated it. Not Jordan. Jordan was fine, but the fact that they needed her. One afternoon, Deja was sitting in the kitchen while Jordan helped Atara with her homework in the living room. She could hear them laughing. Atara was telling Jordan some story about a boy at school, and Jordan was giving her advice, and they sounded so natural together. Deja felt something twist in her chest. That should be me. That night after Jordan left, Atara came into the kitchen and sat down across from Deja. "You okay, Mom?" Deja looked up. "Yeah, why? You seem sad." Deja tried to smile. "I'm fine, baby." Atara didn't look convinced. "Is it because of Jordan?" Deja's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "I know you don't like having her here." It's okay," Atara said. "I get it. But Mom, it's not your fault that you need help. It doesn't mean you're not a good mom." Deja stared at her daughter. When did she get so wise? "I love you," Deja said. "I love you too." In December, Atara asked if she could make a video. She had been watching YouTube for years, makeup tutorials, vlogs, commentary channels, and she wanted to start her own. "About what?" Deja asked. "About us," Atara said. "About what it's like growing up with OI, and what it was like for you having me." Deja hesitated. "Why?" "Because people don't know. They see us and they feel sorry for us, or they think we're brave or whatever. But they don't actually know what it's like, and I think it would help if someone told them." Aquad said, "You sure you want to do that? People online can be really mean." Atara shrugged. "They've always been mean. At least this way I can tell my side of the story." They helped her set it up. Marcus bought her a ring light and a cheap microphone. Aquad showed her how to edit videos on his laptop. Atara's first video was called "My Mom Has Brittle Bones, So Do I. This Is What You Don't See." She filmed it in her bedroom, sitting on her bed with her casted arm resting in her lap. She talked about the fractures, the hospital visits, the pain, the way people stared at her family in public, the comments online when she was a baby, calling her parents selfish. And then she said something that made Deja cry when she watched it. "My mom gets asked all the time if she regrets having me, and I think people expect her to lie and say no. But here's the thing. I don't think it matters whether she regrets it or not, because I'm here. I'm alive, and I'm happy. And yeah, my life is hard. But whose isn't? Everyone's got something. Mine just happens to be my bones, but I've got a mom who fought to keep me, a dad who never gave up, a grandpa who moved in to help raise me. And honestly, I think I'm pretty lucky." The video got 2 million views in 3 days. The comments were mostly supportive, but there were still some that weren't. "This is still selfish. That kid is only saying she's happy because she doesn't know any different. Love doesn't pay medical bills. What happens when the parents die and she's left alone?" Atara read them all, and then she made a second video. "To everyone asking what happens when my parents die. Yeah, I think about that. I think about it a lot, and it scares me. But you know what? Everyone dies eventually, and I'd rather have 13 years with parents who love me than a whole lifetime without them. So if you're worried about me, don't be. I'm good. We're good, and we're figuring it out as we go, just like everyone else." That video got even more views. News outlets picked it up. Local channels, national channels. Someone from Good Morning America reached out asking if they'd do an interview. Deja said no. She didn't want to be a story. She just wanted to be a mom. But Atara's videos kept going. She posted once a week. Sometimes she talked about her condition. Sometimes she just talked about school, friends, normal teenage stuff. People started recognizing her. At the grocery store, at doctor's appointments. Once, a woman stopped Deja in the parking lot and said, "You're Atara's mom, aren't you?" Deja braced herself for criticism, but the woman smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter has a disability, and I've been so scared about what her future looks like, but watching your family, it gives me hope." Deja didn't know what to say. She just nodded. On Atara's 14th birthday, they threw a small party. Just family, Marcus, Jordan, a couple of kids from school. Atara blew out the candles on her cake and everyone sang, and for a moment, everything felt normal. That night, after everyone left, Deja sat on the couch with Aquad and Atara between them, watching a movie they had all seen 100 times. Atara's head was resting on Deja's shoulder. Her casted arm was propped on a pillow. And Deja thought about the photograph from 2012, the one where she was pregnant and terrified and everyone said she was making a mistake. She thought about the doctors who said Atara wouldn't survive. She thought about the strangers who said she was selfish. She thought about the social workers who almost took her daughter away. And she thought about Atara, alive, laughing, growing, thriving. Not despite everything, because of it. Aquad looked over at Deja and whispered, "You okay?" Deja smiled. "Yeah," she said. "We're okay." And for the first time in 14 years, she believed it. Love hadn't been enough, it never is. But love plus help, plus time, plus stubbornness, plus hope. That had been enough, and it still was.